We've got flags and banners, and if you mind your manners, we might even get to standards and what they represent. So just take my voice's hand and we'll both try to understand how this Vexillologic podcast could be flagged for content. Flagged for content.
What's up, VexHeads, and welcome to episode 49 of Flagged for Content. It's the only podcast with the only state-appointed vexillologist as a guest this week. Feel pretty confident in that one. It is also a Flags for Good podcast, and you can head on over to flagsforgood.com/flagged4content, like the digit, and use that same spelling to get 10% off anything, including this show's flag, which they do sell. I know at the end of the show, I do usually drop the show's link tree, which has like most of the things you would ever need to know about the show. Links, it's exactly what it sounds like. But I always forget to mention that we also have merch. So first off, thanks Christoph Hook for reminding me of that and reminding me that I should probably mention it. But also, I will put the link on the screen for the viewers, and I'll have it down near the show notes at the bottom for audio listeners. So you can click that link and go check out what we have. And honestly, it's a little bit of everything. There's like stickers, shirts, coffee mugs. I think there's like a mat that you can set under like your dog or cat's like food and water bowls or something. Which if you get that, like take a picture and send it to me because that one's wild. Anyway, last thing I wanted to plug here is the Patreon. That link is easy. It's patreon.com/flagged4content, all spelled out. And at the $5 level and up, you get bonus addendums with the guests. So like in this case, it's going to be episode 49.5, where Philip and I are going to talk a little bit after the show. It's a little more loosey-goosey. And we're going to talk in this one about one of the flags that is behind him for a lot of, well, for all of his video part anyway, if you watch that. So yeah, that's very cool. At the higher levels, you also get access to Flagged for Even More Content, which is a solo show that I do once a month. I may start doing it more than once a month. But yeah, that one's a lot of fun. Last one I did was the UK county tier list. Threw in some ones that weren't exactly counties too. And that one got some folks up in arms, pun intended. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I made my guest this week late for dinner, and now I'm making you late to hear this episode. But yeah, holy cow. It was a blast and an honor to sit down with the March Pursuivant, the Honorary Vexillologist of the Lyon Court in Edinburgh in Scotland, Philip Tibbetts. Yeah. Apparently I did not clock the honor of the situation at the time, and I just wore like a t-shirt. So this is my attempt at atoning for that, maybe overcorrecting for an oversight, if you will. Also, Philip and I are obviously going to be talking about several Scottish flags, but if Scottish flags are your thing and you want even more, you can check out episode 37, which I will also link here on the video and down below, with Scott Thompson, where we talked about some Scottish flags as well. And I think that's all the housekeeping. So let's carry on regardless and get into episode 49 with Philip Tibbetts. Folks, we have a very esteemed guest for y'all today. You know him as the only state-appointed vexillologist in the world. You know him from the royal funeral and following coronation. And you know him from blending heraldry and Digimon on his social media. It's Philip Tibbetts!
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Me on the show.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't invite you fast enough, more or less. Thank you for deeming to be on a show of this caliber. By that, I mean a low one.
Well, I'm happy to speak to anyone that asks. I'm always happy to speak about flags. Getting me to stop is going to be the trick. So
Right. I suspect a lot of our listeners and viewers can relate to that. For sure. Yeah. So you are in Scotland.
correct. I live in Lockerbie, which is about 15 miles north of the border with England.
Okay, gotcha. So not in Edinburgh.
No. my wife is from Edinburgh originally. I have spent some time there, and I spent some time at St Andrews where I went to university. I live in the south of Scotland, what we would call the uplands, sort of Reaver territory, almost sort of acting independent a lot of the time through history. Very, very fascinating and a very overlooked part of Scotland as well. So something I would recommend people look into. Fascinating area.
I don't know the uplands. I know obviously the highlands are the part that, I guess everyone knows. And then I assume there are lowlands. I think I've heard that. But uplands is a new one to me.
Yeah, so Scotland is, at a very top level, often divided into two, the Highlands and the Lowlands. But there are obviously sort of other lands of Scotland as well. You've got the islands, which were almost a kingdom in and of themselves. And then this south of Scotland area geographically is called the sort of the southern uplands. And it is, even heraldically, we consider it to be slightly different. The way that families and clans operated in the south of Scotland were quite different from how they were done in the Highlands and how they were done in the Lowlands,
Gotcha.
largely because of that border history, that border heritage, and the local rivalries and alliances produced a very distinct cultural area in the south of Scotland.
Yeah, sounds like it. And speaking of that, so your accent, to my American ear anyway, does not sound typically Scottish. Is there some kind of border at play there as well?
Yes, this isn't my, well, how do I describe this? This is a Scottish accent, sort of. This is the accent that I ended up after having gone through the University of St Andrews. I actually grew up in a town called Helzowen in the Black Country of England. So normally, traditionally, I would sound more like Noddy Holder from Slade or Lenny Henry. But I found at university saying "Orachid, Boston" didn't help a huge amount.
Not your social life or anything.
But so I'm English by birth and grew up in England, but I had Scottish family, so we're sort of cross-border family anyway. And funnily enough, I discovered after I'd been appointed as an officer of arms that there had been a previous Scottish Tibbetts officer of arms appointed in 1866, which led me to discover that there had been Tibbettses in Scotland since about 1740.
Oh, wow.
So Tibbetts is a very Black Country surname, but there does appear to be a bit of a Scottish lineage to it as well.
Gotcha. That's cool. So I imagine it's like that kind of thing, which I get this sometimes traveling between like home and where I went to school, where it's like in England, they're like, where'd you pick up the Scottish accent? And then in Scotland, they're like, oh, this guy sounds English kind of thing. A little bit.
I have had that happen before. So, and I suppose with Scotland, I've been lucky enough that I get to work all around Scotland and really work with communities as well. So I've had I'm very lucky to have had such an incredible exposure to all corners of Scottish culture in a sense. So so that's really, really helped me, and I've been very lucky for that.
Yeah. Well, I totally forgot that this was not my Let's All Talk About Our Accents podcast. This is actually my flag one. So I figure as much as I as a linguistics major would love to do that, let's go ahead and get into the or at least what's on the flagpole today. Let the listeners and the lures know. So on the flagpole today, we have got our usual underrated flag. We've maybe got an overrated flag, maybe like a concept. We'll see when we get there. Philip is going to tell us how he got into flags before telling us how he got really into flags on the Lyon Court. We're going to talk all about the Lyon Court. Speaking of that, what it is in general, Philip's very unique role in it. We will discuss some of the UK's newest additions to their Rolovex, and of course, talk a little heraldry. But first, before we get into any of that, Philip, I like to ask my guests, what's the flag that got you into flags?
Well, this is going to sound like a bit of a weird answer, in that I don't think I have a specific flag that got me into flags, oddly. it's more the absence of flags and certain flags that got me into them, I suppose. So,
Okay.
I think the realization occurred to me, during university and just after university, that I'd been looking into symbols that represented me, both directly, but also as part of a community. And I think I'd become aware of the latest developments across the UK. Shetland and Orkney had just received their flags, some in England as well. But for where I'd grown up and the places that I'd lived, there weren't any such flags. So it was really that sort of absence. And then coupled with having sort of travelled at university, been to places like Denmark, having friends from places like Belgium, I really started to admire not just specific flags, but what I would call the system that they had in those countries, where certainly in Belgium, where you'd see a town hall that had the national flag and then the regional flags and the county flags and the town flags, and that sort of spectrum of identity that was on show. And so coupled with the absence of flags, that ecosystem that these places had built, this symbolic ecosystem, was something that I found really, really powerful. And really, if there was a symbol that was my first step onto being active in this world, it isn't even a flag, it's a tartan. In that at university, I met the then girlfriend and now wife, who is a competitive grade Scottish country dancer. And I realised that I was going to need my own kilt in due course if I was to really make a go of things with this lady. And as part of that, when deciding what kilt I should wear, I decided, well, why not design a tartan for an area, a tartan for a community? And it was doing that and that community symbolism that actually was the first step to doing the same thing for flags as well.
That is fascinating. So, quick question. I know we didn't even really discuss this off air or in our correspondence, but did you go to school for design or for anything like design related, or did you kind of just fall into it a different way?
Not directly. So I went and read philosophy, and particularly sort of metaphysical philosophy at university. So not even aesthetical philosophy.
Right.
However, as a hobby, I've always been interested in history. And at university, I did work on the graphic design team. Now, I suppose it's interesting from a later context, being involved in heraldry. Lots of people get into heraldry because of a love of fine art or a love of genealogy or whatever. I won't say that no one has ever got into heraldry through a sort of a graphic design perspective, and I believe at least one of the English heralds, Adam Tuck, who was Rouge Dragon, I think he had a graphic background as well, but it's not hugely normal in a sense, and
Gotcha.
Certainly to be a herald with this sort of flag and graphic background is I wouldn't say completely unique, but it's not necessarily normal.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it seems, and we'll get into it a little bit more obviously down the line, but it seems heraldry is more about like following rules, I guess, than it is about being wildly creative. I mean, I guess there's a good mix of that, but we'll get into it later.
So to answer your point there, I think you're right. Yes. Heraldry goes through fashions, and you can see this in how heraldry is depicted historically. And sometimes that fashion is around the way it is used. So obviously, originally it was the purest heraldry, the earliest heraldry is a communication tool for ships and on battlefields.
Right.
Then the fashion sort of changes to become a way of showing your genealogy, showing as many families as you're related to as possible. It's a status thing more at that point. But also the way that the symbols themselves are designed and depicted goes through different sort of artistic fashions as well. So there's a balance in heraldry. I think sometimes it can be very rules based and constrictive. Sometimes it can be very
sure.
You can do a lot more sort of interesting things when you put your mind to it. And as a continued tangent, one of the things that excites me most about heraldry is I think there's a huge amount of untapped potential in how you adapt heraldry into new ways. So you mentioned earlier my how I try and adapt or reinterpret heraldry into sort of anime because of my daughter's love of Digimon, and I've done other things a bit like that as well. It's perfectly possible, and there's a lot of fun to be had there.
Yeah, he's I'll have it up on the screen for the viewers, but he's at Vex Tibbetts. Like, yeah, I saw the Digimon post like what, a week or whenever ago it was. And yeah, that's when I knew. I was like, I gotta have this guy on. He's posting Digimon. First I'd heard of it. No. All right, so that was ostensibly that was the answer to what's the flag that got you into flags. I went off on a tangent, and then I think you and I are both kind of tangent guys. So
oh yeah,
you know, so this may be a.
If I ever design you a flag, it's going to have a big tangent on it.
Absolutely, yeah, and we established that up top. So anyone who's gotten this far and doesn't know that, that's on them. But yes, the lack of flags, I've heard. Obviously not the most common answer, but I think Brad Lockhart, who was on here from Washington State in the Pacific Northwest, that's kind of what he said. He said his favorite flag, or the one that got him into flags rather, was Alaska, and it was because in Washington State, the state flag is no good, so it's only flown on the occasional government building, etc. City flags are no good or non-existent, and so that was the first one that got him. And it sounds like a kind of similar grass is greener type thing with you as well. Which yeah, all of us who have that experience want to, like he did, like you did, like want to import that. Oh, the grass is greener. Let's get it green over here too, kind of thing. So
nature abhors a vacuum, and flags especially so.
Absolutely. All right, so that was the flag that got you into flags, or the concept of it anyway. Could I get you to give me an underrated flag?
So I'm not going to give you an underrated flag from Scotland, or really any of the ones that I've designed, because that is just too much like choosing your favourite child. For me, it's a bit too tough.
Scotty's choice.
I will say though that there is a flag from a little further afield that always puts a smile on my face. And I did work on it a little bit. I did the artwork for its final appearance in the Flag Institute registry. But the design predates me by centuries, and that is Merioneth, a design that is probably first referenced in a sort of early modern piece of poetry about the Battle of Agincourt, which is nearly certainly made up, but it probably does tie into imagery and landmarks around the local wildlife, the goats, and the sun setting over the sea and Cardigan Bay, of which Merioneth has on its coastline. And yeah, the goat and the sun, I don't know what it is, but it always brightens my day whenever I see it. It's not what you'd call the most, even though it is a very, very old design, and it is perfectly heraldic, but it's not the most common, it's not the most orthodox heraldic. It's not chevron and crosses and whatever. Having the sun as a big field division in the bottom corner is a bit unique. It's obviously not a balanced and symmetrical design because the sun's on in one particular corner. So I don't think I would have designed it this way in a month of Sundays. But I love it. I love it. It puts a smile on my face, and it's one of my favourite counties in the British Isles is Merioneth. It's where I had my the first night of my honeymoon. So I love the place anyway. But that flag, as I say, that always just puts a big smile on my face. Any depiction of it.
I do not blame you. Like, part of you and or viewers, listeners may be wondering, why does this, I know I'm a flag guy, but like, why do I have the flag of Merionethshire, or however you pronounce it? And it's because of everything that you just said. It is such a cool design. I love that little sun in the corner. I love the alternating wavy and like straight pointed rays of the sun. And then like the way I always think of it in my head, I don't know what's supposed to be happening here, but in my millennial brain, it is just three goats yeeting themselves into the sun. And That's good enough for me. It just looks like they're jumping this 3 Icari, I guess, in this case. That
I suppose it's the sort of flag that you couldn't, even though I'm saying it's underrated, and you'd think that was me saying more flags should look like this, but I don't think you can get away with more flags looking like this.
No,
it's brilliant because it's by itself, but I just don't think enough people have seen it, so that's why I wanted to bring it up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thrilled when you mentioned that in our correspondence, because I was like, ooh, good. I finally get to pull this one out of the basement and like hang it up behind me. I have not yet. So yeah, that's fun. All right. So that is an underrated of sorts. So what are we doing as far as overrated here?
Well, I'm making things a little bit more awkward for you, as I have throughout all our correspondence. So, and I suppose for me, as you said, as a state-appointed vexillologist,
the only one,
just to be sort of very, very diplomatic, even very British about this, I'm not sure it's a particularly good idea for me to single out particular flags to say that these are overrated, these are unworthy of any person's particular enjoyment or love. I don't want people in future saying, "Oh, the Scottish vexillologist said that this flag is not worthy." It's just a dangerous route for me to go down.
I was gonna say it could be really good for the show, though. Like it could be like Scottish March Pursuivant says. Like, I don't know.
Well,
I can see
now you get to spread rumours that behind the scenes I was slagging off this flag and that flag, and that you could make money out of this for years to come now. So
yeah, exactly. I'll sell it to what are the British tabloids? The Sun. I don't know.
What I'm going to say instead is,
anyway.
I think that not necessarily overrated, but for us, the vexillographer community, we sometimes get a little over focused on certain things, and I don't mean this necessarily disparagingly, because I think a lot of the things that I'm about to say are things that I did when I started on this path.
Sure.
So I don't want people to stop doing these things. Absolutely, you need to do some of these things to really get going. But I think when a lot of people start, not everyone, and I'm really not trying to overgeneralize, because I know that there are people that don't do this, that are better than me when I started. Sometimes we're a little over focused on ourselves and our own ideas, and really going, I've got a good idea, and this is why you should have my idea.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Now, I did exactly that. I think
it's human nature.
And as I said, I don't really want to stop people doing that, because that they are the catalyst for change in a sense. I suppose what I'm going to sort of come to on this is that I've been working in community flags for about 15 years now. And what I learned after the first couple of years was that it was better to be the gamekeeper rather than the poacher. So rather than trying to get my own flag in everywhere that I could, it was about building that ecosystem I talked about earlier. I want to build this sort of ecosystem, this symbolic ecosystem. And to do that, I can't be the person that is going forward saying, I've got a great idea, this is what you should choose. And I think we as a community, and some people already do this, absolutely. There are people campaigning for better state flags, and they're doing it by saying these are the benefits of having a better state flag rather than the specific. Absolutely, yeah. And I think we need more of that, absolutely more of that. And I suppose the other thing is, or the other thing I would encourage people that are wanting to get into vexillography or wanting to, develop themselves in vexillography, is to look at the wider range of flags that there are. Obviously, we're a lot of people are focused on designing their own flags because they want their own local flag, or they want their own micronation flag, or whatever.
Right.
And they sort of go ahead with, this is what I think is the best. I would very much look at ecclesiastical flags, or particularly heraldic flags as well. And that's not to say that you can't design a great flag without an appreciation of heraldry. Nor am I saying that great flags abide by heraldic rules 100% of the time. But I think you are, again, from the learning that I've had, and obviously what I've done across the UK and across Scotland, the more of an appreciation you get of heraldry, but also maritime signal flags, ecclesiastical flags, military flags, all that sort of things, you'll start to understand why things work in certain circumstances better than others. And I do think that the more a design has an underpinning of heraldry, the more likely it is to be a great design at the end. Not guaranteed, absolutely not. But I think, more of a focus on how we support community rather than ourselves, and more of getting a holistic view of all of vexillography helps as well. So that's how I'm sort of going to answer the overrated question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, let's so yeah, just a few things that I can think of off that. Do you know, like, are there any like countries or even counties, municipality, like, I don't know, I guess it'd probably have to be at least country level, that are doing it really well, in your opinion? Like, for example, I know that Krzysztof Huk in the Czech Republic, or in Czechia, sorry, does a lot of their flag designs for municipalities large and small, and it's exclusively, because it has to be, based on heraldry. Like, I was wondering, have you seen any of those, or any from any other countries that you quite like? Or, I mean, obviously we're not going to call out ones that you don't like, but do you think there's anyone that maybe is just like nailing it with that more than anyone else? Or
the two that certainly I would usually bring up tend to be Canada and the Netherlands.
Okay.
And these are both examples where they are using heraldry, but they're not always using it in the most conservative or traditional way.
Okay.
Both of those are finding novel ways of repurposing heraldry in a slightly different way. Because I will say, there are differences in my mind between heraldry and flags. Although, obviously, given the position I'm in, I do think there's a big overlap between them.
Sure,
but both, they're slightly different media, and that gives us slightly different technical requirements.
Right.
So there are things that I would do on a coat. If I was designing a coat of arms, there are things I would do on a coat of arms that I might not do on a flag. But usually, when I'm designing a flag, I will. I think it works best as a flag largely if it's still following most of the rules of heraldry, if not all of the rules of heraldry.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you something to like lean on, or like fall back on, kind of, or just like as a starting place in general, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to check out.
Outside of the British Isles, those two countries are definitely two countries I think that are finding a way of keeping all the good practice from heraldry, the symbolism that works in heraldry, but understanding that as a flag, as a community flag in particular, it needs to look and act in a slightly different way, and they're able to do that.
Right,
They're definitely the two countries that I look into an awful lot myself. I suppose the other one would be Japan, and the way that Japanese heraldry, the Keimon system, which is functionally very similar, but sort of the way it operates is very different. But the way that often works as well, the simplicity and stuff around it, that's another one that it's one that I've experimented with sort of drawing European heraldry in a using the forms and styles of Japanese heraldry as well. That's another one that I find very, very interesting to study.
I have not looked as much into that one. I would like to look more into that, but just because you mentioned it too, and I don't think I know anything about Canadian or Dutch heraldry. I would assume Canadian heraldry probably draws a lot from British and or French heraldry, depending.
Yes. What I think possibly is the reason why sort of Canadian flags are doing something a bit different is because the Canadian heraldic equivalent to the Lyon Court is relatively modern by heraldic court standards.
Sure, it would have to be, yeah.
So they're very interested in looking at, they historically, obviously, they were tied to sort of British heraldry, and they would follow a lot of those principles. Having set up their own body, they are very good at looking at sort of First Nation symbolism and bringing some of that in. Not always, not every time, but
Right.
I think they're really sort of engaging in what I said earlier, that potential in heraldry, for heraldry to do an awful lot in addition. And that's why I find their stuff so exciting outside the British Isles.
Yeah, and it changes like a little, like I guess like you bringing up the First Nation, like the indigenous folks and their designs being brought in, reminds me of the flag of the city of Montreal, where it used to be, which is also very heraldic in nature. Do you know that one? It's like yeah. But they included, I think it's like a gold spruce or like a gold tree in the middle that didn't used to be there at the center. That one, I think, honestly, just cleans up, like it makes it look better, even though it's adding something. I normally like say that makes it too busy sometimes, but it makes it look better. And it's like, yeah, it's, you can't ignore the folks that were there before you. But anyway, let's go ahead and move into the Lyon Court, rather. I'm checking my notes here.
Are you getting mistaken with the Lion's Den? Am I that
the
scary?
Lion's Den, yeah, I don't know. It's the Lord Lyon apostrophes court. He owns the court. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the Lyon Court. But before we do, let's go ahead and take an ad break, and we will be right back. All right, folks, and we are back with more from Philip Tibbetts. And yeah, Philip, we were just about to get into what I can't stop calling the Lion's Court, but is actually called the Lyon Court. And the fact that I don't know even how to pronounce it, I'm guessing a lot of our viewers and listeners don't know too much about it either. So could you kind of give us like the rundown, broadly speaking, what is the Lyon Court and what does it do?
Right. So effectively, the one sentence description would be, we are one of the world's oldest intellectual property organizations.
Okay.
So we know that Robert the Bruce was assigning Lord Lyons back in his day, and our understanding is that the role of Lord Lyon probably goes back even, or versions of it go back into effectively Dark Age Scotland, so predating even heraldry to a degree.
Gotcha.
What the Lyon Court has become is, it is our duty to preserve, promote, and protect the symbols of Scotland. So we hold effectively a book, but a book of many, many, many volumes that I think it was last year. Was it last year or the year before? Celebrated its 350th anniversary. And that records every official heraldic symbol in Scotland, including right at the start, the saltire and the lion rampant themselves. Historically, the heralds within the Lyon Court would also serve as almost like proto-ambassadors. That's the point of a herald, is we herald the crown of Scotland. And sort of act as its I don't want to say messengers, but we sort of precede heralds. We do, or we would have done, all that sort of thing. We don't do that quite so much these days, but we do still retain a significant ceremonial role. So we appear at Scottish state ceremonies, from the opening of the Scottish Parliament to, as you said in your intro, the recent funeral of Queen Elizabeth, who obviously passed in Scotland. So we had a lot to do with that, and the coronation of King Charles. Obviously, the coronation was done in London, to which we attended to as a way of representing the Scottish side of his crown. But following that, there was then a presentation of the honours of Scotland, the Scottish crown jewels, which are the oldest crown jewels in the British Isles, to King Charles later on in Edinburgh. We attended that as well. So effectively, and this is what I say when I go into lots of primary schools as part of flag competitions.
Yeah, very cool.
What I try and really simplify it for the primary students is we're a bit like the medieval X-Men. We all have colourful uniforms, code names, and bizarre powers. Although the Lyon Court powers are legal, so I'm not about to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
None of you shoot lasers out of your eyes, or
not yet. Sadly, I am working on that.
Gotcha. Good.
So
yeah, I guess
that is in a nutshell what the Lyon Court is.
Right. I love that the way you explain it to kids in primary school was also the way that it made the most sense to me. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I got that. That's about
funny, when I go to play parks with my daughter, she will tell other kids that this is my dad. He's called Daddy March because my name March is officially another name for me, especially when I'm in uniform. But I discovered this last week that I'm entitled to have that as the name on my passport, should I wish.
You can instead, how would it be worded? Just March first.
I'll be honest, I'm incredibly tempted, but I can only imagine how difficult it would be to do that, because at every flight booking I'd have to sort of type in March Pursuivant, and I think it just could get quite difficult.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like even when you get married, if you change your name or something, even that. Well, of course, TSA in the U.S. is its own animal, but yeah. I can't imagine just changing it completely to March. It's we don't have any record of that. Well, why don't you go to, I don't know, a little place called the Lyon Court and ask them.
And then, of course, if I get promoted to a different role, I have to change everything anyway. So, yeah.
Right. True. Yeah, that is funny, though. Okay, so that's the Lyon Court rundown. And then you talked a little bit, or kind of just through the course of this conversation, we've talked a little about your role. But do you want to expand on, so I know what an honorary vexillologist is. I suspect most listeners and viewers do, but a March Pursuivant?
Pursuivant. Although you will hear people say Pursuivant as well. It's just we in this court tend to say Pursuivant. So tomato, Pursuivant. Yeah, it's all good.
Sure.
So yes, as you alluded to, I have two roles within the court, which isn't common but isn't unheard of either. In my case, one is the Honorary Vexillologist, which I got first. I was appointed to that in 2018, following on the back of having worked so much in Scotland with the court on various competitions. And it is a role, but it's not a role in the same way that being an officer of arms is. So I suppose it's a bit more like being an advisor, although in my case, I was sort of like an advisor with a right to roam, in a sense. So, I could operate. Lyon was happy for me to operate in his name, under his authority, and to sort of do that as required. So my other position is to give it its full title, if we want to be really, really grandiose about this,
and we do,
is I am His Majesty's March Pursuivant of Arms Extraordinary, which is wonderful on a business card, it has to be said. So effectively, this boils down to I am a type of role which is an officer of arms. Okay. And there are different grades of officer of arms. So broadly speaking, there are two normal versions, which are heralds and pursuivants, although most people will call all officers of arms a herald and will know what you're talking about.
Sure.
But technically, there are heralds and pursuivants. Pursuivants being a lower grade than herald, and then each of those can be divided between ordinaries and extraordinaries. And ordinaries are more senior because the extraordinaries are the extraordinary. They're not the they're sort of extra additions in a sense. So you can think of me being March Pursuivant Extraordinary as being the extraordinary is almost like junior. I'm the lowest grade.
Pursuivant is junior to herald, and extraordinary is junior to ordinary.
So there can be some nuance within that, but yes, as a
So on a
general
sinking ship,
description-
they're kicking you overboard first. No, I'm just kidding.
well, during the funeral and the coronation, you'll see me at the head of most processions.
Right,
Which
I
people
know.
think means
Yeah,
I'm really important, but because I'm the most junior, I'm the furthest away from the crown, and I'm the most dispensable for if someone wants to cause any trouble. So that's why I'm there, not because I'm important.
yeah, but it's hard to wrap my mind around that because, like, I've seen the videos, like, especially like doing a little bit of research for this and everything, and like, I was like, oh man, he's right out there, like the first one you see, basically. But yeah, it's
I'll
all
be
of
honest,
this is counterintuitive, basically, to me. The extraordinary thing is counterintuitive, and the fact that you're at the front is counterintuitive. Like, I don't know.
So I suppose the way to describe why I was at the front is we're heralds, so we herald the crown, whether that's the crown or whether that's the person or whatever.
Sure.
So we go in front, but within our ranks, the most important person has to be the one closest to the crown. So that's Lord Lyon.
Yep.
So then you just go forward in decreasing seniority until you're left with me. And I will say, I don't want to say I'm lucky, because lucky isn't the word, because the Queen died, or Queen Elizabeth died. The fact that I was sworn in almost exactly a year before all this happened,
right,
felt very much like the planets aligned. The fact that I ended up being involved in those events, helping to represent my nation, Scotland, in those events, and being part of the whole sort of symbolic lightning rod through which the nation channeled not just me and not just the herald, the whole ceremony was this symbolic lightning rod for the nation to sort of channel its emotions through, and to be sort of in the middle of that was quite amazing. And just by virtue of being the most junior, I ended up happening to be in the lead of a lot of that, which was not just something that I am very honoured to do, but very surreal as well.
Yeah, it's good that, like, those uniforms, like, that you've got in the background of your shot there, it's good that they come down a little bit longer, because I would have peed my pants, I think, at that point.
It was a long time on duty, I'm not going to lie.
Just saying. Hey, well, that's for the Patreon after or something. No, okay, so that is awesome. That's the March Pursuivant and everything. So and your role in the Lyon Court. So tell me more about, like, the Lyon Court is basically where Scottish counties and maybe other municipalities, you can tell me, but it's what they have to go through to get a flag adopted. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of that process, or processes, if there are different routes to it?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, as you say, any symbol, certainly any heraldic related symbol, has to go through the Lyon Court. And that's been the case for centuries. And I suppose the fun bit is that to do that, you have to pay some money, and that money goes directly into the Scottish Treasury. So if there are people out there that are using flags, personal flags, whatever, that haven't had this payment made, it's technically a form of tax evasion, which is why our sort of legal enforcement powers are quite strong. That's the historical reason for why we're able to impound improperly used symbols through Scotland. So legal protection for coats of arms in Scotland is stronger than for commercial copyrights, for instance.
Right, which is wild to American ears too, because, like, over here, the corporation is everything. But yeah, so it wraps back into what you said at the beginning about, like, the world's oldest intellectual property.
So you might have seen Harris Tweed, fairly famous brand, which makes tweed cloth in the Outer Hebrides. And for a long time, they've had a trademark, which is a sort of scepter symbol. And I forget when it was. It's probably maybe about 10 years ago. They actually applied to have a coat of arms as well, because if they, if someone was counterfeiting their produce and using the normal trademark, that person could be fined, but that was the end of the day. But if they had a coat of arms and put that on illegally, then Harris Tweed can apply to the Lyon Court, and we can impound and do all sorts of stuff to that material, not just fine them. So that's why these protections are so strong in Scotland. Specifically, it's much stronger than our equivalent in England and Wales. So it's just I don't want to say a quirk. It's a legacy of the way that the Scottish law was different.
Right.
So
right.
The Lyon Court comes from before Scotland joined the Union. So it's the Lyon Court is one of those bodies of the original Scottish government and the Scottish state that survives to this day. So in a sense, there is a legal requirement that any community, as well as individual, that wants to have a symbol in Scotland has to come through the Lyon Court. However, this hasn't been a huge problem. As you may have gathered over the last few years, we've been getting more and more communities wanting flags in Scotland.
Yeah.
And the process, there is a legal process that is required, and I'm not going to bore you necessarily with that, but that payment of the fees ties into that. That is part of that legal process, that legal requirement that the court is held to by law, in a sense. But then, in addition to that, we had to find a way of doing these community flags because there hadn't been very many historically. Obviously, in a sense, there is one obvious historic one, and that is the saltire. You can think of the saltire as the community flag for Scotland. So you've got the lion rampant there, and this is an important distinction to make.
Yeah,
Scotland has the saltire and the lion rampant, but both of those flags are doing slightly different things technically. Mm-hmm. So the lion rampant, that is the symbol of the executive of Scottish power. In our case, it's the crown. It's the royal symbol. And I suppose the illustration of that is if you were fighting someone, probably the English in the Middle Ages, and you're on the battlefield, you would want only one person, i.e. the king or queen, to be flying that flag, because if an order came from under that flag, that was something you were to follow. If lots of people had that flag on the battlefield, it would cause confusion.
Yeah.
Whereas the saltire was a flag to show allegiance. Everyone could fly that.
Okay.
So that's why in Scotland and also in the rest of the British Isles, we have this sort of tradition of having a community flag and a flag of authority, for want of a better phrase.
Okay, yeah.
That exist side by side and complement each other. So, in a sense, Scotland's had a community flag for several centuries.
Yeah.
Even though not many flags, community flags, were then used in the same way. Scotland did have lots of other community symbols, though. So the way heraldry works in Scotland and clan crests and all that sort of stuff, there were lots of other symbols to use, but not necessarily as flags. Mm-hmm. Until the 1950s, when Shetland started to develop its own flag.
I didn't know it was that old.
The original concept for the design was sort of in the 50s. It was only registered in 2005.
Gotcha.
So, so in a sense, Shetland is almost one of the earliest of the modern wave of vexillology in the British Isles, even though it didn't get registered until 2005. From 2005, you had Shetland, followed by Orkney, and these were both handled by the court before my time, well before my time, and before the current Lord Lyon. And I think handled on a fairly sort of one-off basis. And it was only really with Caithness in 2014, which coincided with the appointment of our current Lord Lyon, Joseph Morrow, where I was invited up, and I had been doing a lot of community flag work across England and Wales, for instance, Marioneth and various other places.
Yeah.
Because of my experience in England and Wales, and because of my family and personal connections in Scotland, I went up to Caithness, where I met Lord Lyon and the community in Caithness wanting their flag. And part of my job on that day was to say, okay, this is how competitions can be run, but this is how I believe it should and could be tailored to slot into Scots law, and particularly the laws around the Lyon Court, and not even the law specifically, even just the philosophy of how it fits into the law.
Sure.
And everything. And our current Lion, being a very sort of reforming Lion, was keen to take this forward, because this was a way of showing how heraldry is relevant and important to modern Scotland.
Right.
Is to empower communities to develop their own, for the Lyon Court to give them the tool sets and the knowledge and the support through me to do this.
That's hugely important. And like you said, like it kind of it gets the ball rolling a little bit too. Once I mean, I know it's kind of like what we talked about at the beginning with seeing the lack of flags, but then going elsewhere and seeing cool ones. It's like, well, okay, like Skye, for example, is like, okay, well, Caithness has got a flag now. Why don't we have one? We need to get one too. Or okay, Aberdeenshire's like, I don't know, Kirkcudbright. I don't know how to pronounce like any of these things, but like they got a flag. We need a flag. And I have been looking at the map as it's been filling in and filling in. And a lot of the communities that it does seem to be spreading like to neighbors in a lot of cases, not in every
domino effect.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's not an accident.
How successful the communities that have adopted them have been with their flags. You know, it's not just I like, they've got a cool design. It's often they've got a cool design, but they're using it in a really beneficial way. Whether that's the people in our neighbouring county are really happy because they've got this symbol of pride, or wow, they're really using this as a really great branding tool, and they're raising awareness of their community, and we should be doing the same. So
yes,
I think there is a benefit around that, and that's really showing the benefit of that. I should say, in terms of the process, we have the process is an interesting thing to sort of think about philosophically. There are elements of the process that are legally mandated and required and therefore fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also dealing with, and also there's, how we sort of fitted the best practice that I developed with the Flag Institute to serve this as well. So that sort of builds on another layer. And then there's also a sort of the community facing side to this as well. And again, I have worked, as I say, 15 years doing this, from entire regions down to counties, down to sub-regions, to islands, to towns. You have to have a very flexible approach because each community's needs and requirements are different. So there are things we can't change. There are things that we shouldn't change, and there are things that we need to be able to offer to the community to flex to meet their unique needs as well. And sometimes that's easy and sometimes that's difficult. But philosophically, it's very, very interesting because sometimes I'm working in a community like Maryhill, which is a suburb of Glasgow, so very urban, industrial heritage, very well connected, fantastic broadband speeds, all that sort of stuff. Wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes I'm working in, somewhere like Caithness or Sutherland, a very, very broad rural area with pockets of community dotted around, and it can take hours to get around anyway. So it's like, how do you tailor things like how they submit entries or how they're going to do their vote? And you could go, is internet going to be easy for them, or is connectivity an issue, or or is the demographic of the community, do a lot of these people just not have internet because either the access isn't there or they're of an age where they're not interested in it? because these are conversations I have genuinely had with
basically witchcraft, the internet. So
yeah, so I can't go in with a sort of long list of thou shalt do X, Y, and Z to the nth degree. It needs to be a sort of, right, the important things you need to do with this. These are the other things that I would recommend. These are the things where, and then there's a sort of other area of these are the things where, what's your feeling in the community and how can we make this work?
Okay, yeah. That is interesting.
So if you wanted me to sort of really explain to you in this podcast how the process works, I could be here for a very, very long time explaining every single caveat and every single sort of subdivision of how to do it. But
I mean, depending on how much time you have afterwards, we can. Depending on how much time you have afterwards, we can maybe do a little bit for the Patreon or something. Like, honestly, I'm. You say, like, you laugh, but everyone is interested in that. I think so. This is the right audience for that. But what I was going to say is, like, they are asking you to do a whole lot. I mean, I'm sure you're not, well, or maybe you are unaccompanied on a lot of these. I don't know. But, like, you're basically having to do a sociologist's work while, doing the rest of your job as the honorary vexillologist, I guess, more in that role for this. But, like, yeah, they're asking you to do a lot, and it seems like, I mean, to your credit, like, you're killing it. I didn't know you had to do all that.
I'm not going to lie, it's a very tough job in a sense. There's a lot of work involved with this, and admittedly, in a sense, the communities themselves have to do a lot of work, but I'm there to try and support them an awful lot of the time.
Shepherd them.
I do like going to the communities as often as I can. Because it helps build that rapport. It also is most beneficial to them if I'm sort of sat there with them and I can go through as long as they require, every consideration that they might want to have.
Yeah.
I have had to think of ways of managing this a bit easier, because obviously I have all the other duties with the Lyon Court, but I also have a day job because none of the Lyon Court stuff is paid. So I have a full other day job, and of course I have my family as well. So, but at the same time, as I'm making this sound difficult, and why on earth would you do this, Philip? But I suppose for me, it's a huge honour to help any community, and I don't really mind what level of community. I find it a huge honour whether I'm working on a community, on a county, or whether I'm working with a village or an island. It's always a huge honour. It's a huge honour to help them. It's a huge honour because these are all, each symbol is part of Scotland's symbolic ecosystem. So there's a sort of national prestige as well, or a national honour that I find it's great to be part of. And I also get to learn a huge amount as well, because I have seen so many parts of Britain, and particularly Scotland, and I'm not just seeing the place, I'm seeing the community, because I'm not just there as a tourist. I'm speaking to the community and I'm working with them as well. So I've got to learn so much, and even picked up, I've picked up bits of Gaelic, which is not something Scots Gaelic that I ever thought I would. Some of the experiences that I've had, I've had very positive experiences, and there have been times where I've seen the work that I've been involved with and the flags as a result being used in some tragic circumstances, with really heartbreaking ones. But that very much reminds me that, a flag's not just for the great carnivals and celebrations.
Yeah.
A flag can be a big help in a community's pain and suffering on occasions.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, like, in I don't have children, but I guess, like, in a certain sense, it's like you relinquish your, like, once they turn 18, not flags, but like you like relinquish it, and it's like, all right, you're not mine. Well, you're out on your own in the world now. You're gonna make your own choices. People are gonna, like, I don't know. Maybe the analogy breaks down a little bit, but it does seem like
of these flags take an independent light, especially community flags, which are sort of everyone can use. They take on this sort of independent life in a sense. So seeing how they used. I suppose I don't want to say that I'm the father of the flags, but there is a sort of almost paternalistic look at them. And I should say, in terms of real fatherhood, in a sense, I never really saw this as a huge benefit, but the sort of the weird knock on this has had to my own family, in a sense. So when my daughter was born, aged 2 weeks, she was put in the car with me to go up to Sutherland for the Sutherland flag competition stuff. So she's been driving around with me around Scotland, and we've had so many sort of wonderful experiences.
And that's
And she's ended up, was it last year? At 5 years old, we had a parade with me in uniform in Edinburgh for the 350th anniversary of the Lyon Court's register.
Yeah, I think I saw your pictures of that.
Yeah, there was a public parade of flags, and Isabel, my daughter, at 5 years old, was asked to lead the personal flag section. So she was carrying my flag on an official parade through Edinburgh. So
all right, yeah. Never been so jealous of a 5-year-old.
This job is difficult and it requires an awful lot. I've benefited from it, and I've seen, my family's got some wonderful memories out of it as well. So
yeah, I can say I'm incredibly jealous. Like, that sounds amazing. Like, I mean, I love to travel. I suspect a lot of us VexHeads do. And like getting like down, like you said, not just the place, but like into the community. Like, what are people like here? What do they hold important? Like, what are their, like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And I guess you don't get paid for it, but you probably get to at least expense it or something. I don't know. Like, either way, I'd pay to do that. So whatever the answer is, where do we sign up for to be the honorary? No, that would be amazing though. All right, so let's go ahead, and now that we've talked about the flags and kind of a little bit about the process and all that, let's go ahead and get into the flags themselves. But first, we do need to take one more ad break. Folks, we'll be right back. All right, folks, and as we continue to march forth here, we are going to be getting into a few of the flags themselves in Scotland. I think kind of transitioning off of that last bit, Philip, we were talking about the process and all that, and there were actually in 2023 there were 4 flags I know that became official, but 2 of those kind of started in 22. So I'd love to focus on the 2 most recent ones, and I know I'm going to get the pronunciation of these very badly wrong, but Moray and Banffshire.
Pretty good start. Pretty good start. Moray and Banffshire.
Sure, yeah, what you said. So, so as mentioned, these are the 2 newest ones. We've talked a little bit about the process, but I am curious to the unique individual processes here at play. But also, like, let's get into the flags themselves and what they represent, I guess, really. Which one would you like to start with?
Well, I'll talk about them sort of both generally, because they have a sort of slightly combined history, as you say, sort of following on from Aberdeenshire, which was the first of these flags in northeast Scotland. The sort of neighbouring counties, Banffshire neighbours Aberdeenshire, but Moray doesn't actually share a border. But obviously they're quite close. They decided to sort of hold simultaneous competitions together, which isn't a first, but it is fairly unique. For me, I have to say it helps significantly because
really?
I don't have to go up to each county individually. Everything was organised so that I could come up, and in one visit I could do everything that I needed to do across both counties. So
save money on petrol,
so it definitely saved on petrol, given I don't get paid or expenses. So that was good. And to be fair, like the communities are usually very very supportive, and they will put me up, as was the case with Moray and Banffshire.
That is nice.
So I did get to go up quite early last year. I think I went up 2 or 3 times for these 2 counties, and the main one was to go and speak to the primary schools as part of the launch. So this is something that I like to offer for every community if I can. And they put on a wonderful itinerary over the course of a week, and I was seeing 3 or 4 schools each day, which again is quite hard work, but it's very rewarding. And you're seeing all sorts of schools from all sorts of backgrounds. Whether it's a sort of in-town one or a very rural one. This was, I think, the first time that I got to speak to a private school. I got to give a presentation to Gordonston, which is where Prince Philip and Prince Charles both went to school, which is in Moray. And it's always rewarding. I've got to say, I love speaking to primary schools because the pupils are usually so brimming with new ideas.
Yeah.
And usually they come up with often completely unacceptable designs, which are always just brilliantly fun and political in strange ways. So we had one, I think, in Sutherland, which was a picture of a horse pulling a train carriage, which was a comment on the local rail service. From one of the primary schools. So I love going to the primary schools. And with Moray and Banffshire, there are lots of great schools. I remember one I'll call out, which was Mustodlock, which is sort of on the border between the two counties. And I was probably there for another 45 minutes answering questions at the end of the school assembly because
that's cool.
The kids had so many ideas. And this is why I think it's really rewarding to get these communities involved. And whether this will happen with any US state redesigns, where they really try and engage the state, community in trying to come up with ideas and educating the pupils in the state, I don't know. But I'm very glad that in Scotland in particular, and the rest of the UK, when I do this work elsewhere in the UK, that I get to do this because. As you'll have seen in Scotland and some of the rest of the UK as well, pupils have a fantastic habit of winning these things.
Yeah, I mean, Aberdeenshire was a hybrid of two pupils' ideas, wasn't it? More or less, yeah.
And both Moray and Banffshire were won by primary students as well.
Oh, wow.
Which was, really makes or really validates, even if I just self-validate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right.
Feels like what I'm doing is the right sort of thing.
Yep.
I got to go up and got to speak to all the schools, and we ran that competition. I then went back up for the judging panels. The judging panels were, I think, the week before the coronation. So I was running up and down the country.
You're busy, man.
And these down select panels where you go from the hundreds and hundreds of entries down to the sort of the 4 that you're going to vote for.
Yeah,
that's something that is also a very mentally taxing thing to do because you're trying to sort of facilitate the whole thing for the other judges. You're trying to bring the other judges up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to I don't want to say steer them, guide them as to what's acceptable or not, but give them the power to make the decision of what they think is relevant for the county. And then you go through a rapid prototyping phase. Because some of these entries might be, primary school felt tip pen and whatever.
Yeah.
So I need to, by the end of this process, I need to try and rapidly prototype not just the 4 that you'll see being voted on. There might be 10 or 12 that I need to prototype into. This is 80% of what it's going to look like as a flag, which levels the playing. So rapidly prototyping everything levels the playing field for the individual. So if a graphic designer's put an entry in, fine. But if a pupil's put one in that's felt tip pen, obviously that needs refinement, and you need to bring it to the same level so that the judges can choose fairly and that the public will be able to choose fairly as well. So I need to do all that, all in the space of a few hours. It's a very, very tiring thing to do, and we did these sort of back to back on 2 different days. Always, I keep making this sound a lot of work because it is a lot of work, but it is hugely enjoyable. And I've had a lot of experience with doing these down select panels. So I was back for that, and then basically the vote was held for both of them, again running simultaneously, and they even coordinated the unveiling of their flags at the same time. So one of the few non-legal things we mandate at the Lyon Court for a flag competition is that the unveiling is done as a real physical ceremony to give it a sense of occasion, and everything. And
so wait. Sorry, just like pause really quick there. So the unveiling being done as a physical ceremony. Are you saying that nobody has seen like a JPEG of the flag yet? The first
other
time,
than at the voting. So at the voting, they'll have seen the four, 5, or 6 as JPEGs.
Will they have known which one won, or is the hoisting it? That's the announcement.
Hoisting it usually. Berwickshire got caught in some slight complications, so that's the only one that hasn't gone through a physical unveiling. But usually we say the whole community will not know the winner until that physical unveiling.
I think I like that. I haven't really thought about all the different aspects to it, but I know like what I'm thinking about right now is Minnesota here in the US. They have come up with, like, their committee has come up with a flag that I think is boring and regrettable, but whatever. But yeah, it's plastered everywhere as like a JPEG, like an SVG image. Like people are already putting it on like Captain America uniforms and soccer jerseys and this, that, and the other. But not a, I mean, I'm sure somebody has made a real one at this point, but like there hasn't been a physical unveiling. Whereas in Syracuse, New York, they physically unveiled, I think, all 4 of the finalists and then had people vote based on that, which I thought was a cool way to do it. A little different from both, what we've been talking about. But yeah, no wrong answers. But that's, I do like that better, I think, the current Scottish way other than Berwickshire. What was their deal?
I got to go back up to the 2 counties towards the end of last year for their unveilings, and you would have thought that an autumn-winter unveiling of a Scottish flag is a very optimistic thing to do. But both ceremonies went very well. They coordinated them so they were on the same day, and it was funny. I had me and my wife decided to sort of treat ourselves to this tiny off-grid cottage in the middle of nowhere, Banffshire.
That sounds amazing.
It didn't have the services. There was a tiny burn just outside the front. I got to take all my uniform with me into this tiny cottage and get ready for it. And the morning of the flag ceremonies, you couldn't see, more than sort of 100 meters in front of you. It was so misty, and there was rain, and we were driving up to Cullen, which is the home of Cullen skink, which is Scottish soup, where their unveiling was. And when we got there, the sun came out. There was this huge rainbow over Cullen, which is a beautiful Scottish seaside town with this, giant stone viaduct in front of it. And we were on the hill where the castle used to be, which now has this big flagpole on it. And we had this wonderful ceremony with the pupil that had won the competition there, and I got to be there in my uniform. This uniform isn't often seen outside of Edinburgh, and I think I'm very privileged that I get to sort of take it more around the country.
Fair. I was
full unveiling ceremony, and then in the afternoon we got to go across to Elgin, which is the county town of Moray, and had another ceremony again with the pupil there and the Lord Lieutenant, and it was a wonderful 2 counties to work with, I have to say.
Yeah, I was. I heard half of that. I was daydreaming through the other half because holy cow, that sounds holy Highland coup. That sounds amazing.
And if you wanted to get any better, Banffshire and Moray are basically comprise the region, the whiskey region known as Speyside. So there's lots of whiskey there as well. So I was well in my element.
I was going to say this slight tangent, hopefully not too long a one, but you know how we are. I am, along with my, for the wedding, planning a like bachelor party, and we're all like in our mid 30s. We're thinking maybe like a trip somewhere, and Scotland is on the radar, and everything that you just mentioned, I think it just went up a few spots, like on the ranking list. Like that is a very, God, that sounds amazing. Anyway,
I will happily,
The papers over here,
try
but
and encourage you down that avenue.
yeah,
if you
absolutely.
choose.
I may hit you up after this for some tips or advice or whatever. But anyway, okay, so that sounds like a full day. You got to go to both. You had the what do you got? Your uniform.
So yes, my uniform here, I call it. There's different layers of it. The top one is obviously the most iconic one. It's the tabard, and that is effectively our coat of arms. That's where the phrase "our coat of arms" comes from. That's a coat made of arms.
I don't know how I never made that connection. The coat bit, I guess. Yeah.
So
weird.
I'm only meant to wear. So I wear my uniform, or various forms of my uniform, depending on certain circumstances. But the tabard requires particular circumstances and permissions to be met. But for flag unveilings, certainly for county ones, depending on who's in the audience, I am lucky enough that I get to wear that. So I got to wear it for the Aberdeenshire one, which I think was the first unveiling in Scotland I got to wear it for, and then for both Moray and Banffshire as well. Berwickshire, as I alluded to, which is the final flag that was finalised in 2023.
Right.
They unfortunately got caught out by the result leaking before they got to do their unveiling. So that was the result was known, but there hasn't been an unveiling ceremony with me there in uniform or not yet. So that might happen in due course.
But they're not going to pick a new one just because somebody unveiled the winner.
No, it caused. I don't want to say that it was a showstopper and stopped the registration happening, but it did put us in a slightly tricky legal position. The way I would sort of describe it, and this isn't a perfect analogy, but if you think of the Lyon Court as a legal court, because it is a legal court, Lord Lyon is the judge, and he is the one that makes the decision. So if you had a criminal trial, the jury would make a recommendation on the acceptability of guilty or not guilty.
Right.
But then the judge would take that into consideration and set a sentence.
Right. Okay.
So what happens in this process with the down select panels is the down select panels and the public vote are a bit like the jury. So they say, we would like this flag, but it's only when Lord Lyon signs the paperwork that it becomes the flag. If you see what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
So because it leaked before Lord Lyon had made that sort of signature, we got slightly out of process, and it was a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a shame, but to the community's credit, to Berwickshire's credit, and the organisers' credit, they were able to put a press release out with some well thought out wording, which was along the line, which basically didn't sort of preempt the judge's authority. But they had to say something because it was leaking, effectively.
Right.
Whereas to the credit of the office staff at the Lyon Court, they were able to sort of get the legal paperwork all finalised before too much diverged in the process. So
that's fortunate. All right. So that's well, you pronounce them again. Moray and Banffshire.
Moray and Banffshire.
Anyway, that's the two newest ones. Currently, like we just heard the tale of Berwickshire, but wanted to talk about there was something that you mentioned actually between where was it, Barra and South Uist? Is I think how you pronounced it?
Barra and South Uist, yeah.
Barra and South Uist. So yeah, give us a little. So these are in the Hebrides, the Hebrew. I don't know how you pronounce it, but
these are two islands at the sort of the southern end of the Outer Hebrides.
Okay.
And I was working with them from sort of 2017 into 2018, possibly even 2016 actually. And I think they're fascinating. I mentioned earlier that I'm how lucky I am that I get to sort of experience all these different parts of the cultures that make up what it is to be Scotland, and this was very much an example of that. And not just because I'd never been to the Outer Hebrides before, and going there was a fantastic experience. So Barra, for those of you that don't know, they have an airport, and that airport is the beach. So you fly over there and you land on the beach, and the locals say that it's the only airport in the world where the runway is washed twice a day. It's an incredible place to go and land. And my wife and I went there in December, and we were the last, apart from the police officer, we were the only non-islanders on the island. And it was their Christmas party weekend. And everywhere we went, everyone knew that I was the flagman. And we were invited to absolutely everything. We were invited to the Ceilidh in the old folks' home. We were invited to the school children's poetry evening, and it was a fantastic, fantastic immersion into that culture. But
yeah,
I think what the two Barra and South Uist do when I talk about them is they really taught me something about how identity works in Scotland and that part of Scotland. So,
right.
So
really quick, let's go into what the flags look like, and I think that's going to lead into what you're about to say. Like, briefly explain the difference or the.
So both islands had unofficial flags that they didn't really know where they'd come from, and they still don't really know. They've got suspicions, but they both had these unofficial flags, and they're both effectively Scandinavian cross star flags. So Barra is a white Scandinavian cross on green, and South Uist is sort of the same, but with a blue centre to the Scandinavian cross as well. Mm-hmm. So I'd been asked by some of the local politicians to go to Barra to explain to them how they could get this unofficial flag turned into an official flag. Mm-hmm. And they had lots of plans, which they have done, on how to use it really positively. So if you go to Barra, in their local shops, everything that's made locally has little Barra flag stickers on it and all that sort of stuff.
Love it.
Once word had got around that I'd been on Barra, I was approached by South Uist, who not only wanted to get their flag registered, but they wanted to get their flag registered before Barra's was registered.
Okay.
So there was this wonderful island rivalry to it.
As happened.
They were both really keen on being the first. And now, obviously, I, as effectively a representative of an arm of the Scottish government, can't sort of do favouritism.
Yeah.
It was more down to how quickly each of them sorted out their own internal politics and sign-offs as to who was going to win this thing. As it happened, South Uist managed to get this sorted quicker, largely because Barra was split. There was no one council for Barra. There was effectively two, and they needed to sort of coordinate. South Uist had been bought out by a community landlord, historically, a body called Storis Uist. So they were able to sort of operate more as an individual entity. The community landlord, which is basically the community had become their own landlord.
Right. Okay. Got it.
They were able to sort of just go, right, we can act for all of South Uist and get paperwork sorted sooner. So they were actually in the lead, and not only in the lead, they won. And on the morning that they won, I sent them an email to say, it's been signed off by Lord Lyon. Your flag is now official. That was the day of the Manchester Arena terrorist attack, the Ariana Grande concert.
Right. Yeah.
And there were two girls from Barra that were injured. One was killed in that terrorist attack. And I got a phone call from them, from South Uist, saying, we need you, Philip Tibbetts, to tell us what the protocol around half-masting our flag is, and please do not tell Barra that we have won. And for all that rivalry that I'd been sort of enjoying for the last few months,
right? Yeah.
It was a real indication, like there is a genuine rivalry between them, absolutely. But the sort of the solidarity and the unity, and it wasn't until months later where I actually told Barra, I was like, South Uist won, and their first act of having an official flag was to half-mast it for a fellow islander. It was really, really moving. And in due course, Aileen McKinnon's body was brought back and landed at that beach on Barra and brought out draped in the flag. And that was a real moment where I realised that whilst I have a huge amount of fun doing this, and I love seeing communities use their flags in such positive and creative ways, that there is a real importance to how a flag can bring a community together in such difficult, tragic times as well. So I think the story around Barra and South Uist is it really gave me an understanding of this part of Scottish community and how an identity and how that works, but also the utility of flags that we sometimes overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Like, it kind of goes to show, like, you know, flags can be so divisive, and like you were talking about at the beginning of this, huge rivalry, similar flag designs, all that. But yeah, at the end of the day, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but at the end of the day, you know, the right thing wins out. So that's good to see, like, in both cases. That, I mean, literally getting it adopted, and the first thing you do is run it only half the way up, or, you know, run it up and half back down. But yeah, that is very cool and uniquely Scottish Vex story, or at least a uniquely vexillologic story, for sure. Let's we gotta wrap up soon, but let's end on a lighter note. We had two other flags that we wanted to discuss, and for me personally, they are among my two favorites. Perennially among my two favorites. One of them probably is my favorite, that one being Sutherland, and the other one being the Isle of Skye. And yeah, the reason that we wanted to discuss these, we both kind of came in our correspondence ahead of this, like we kind of came up with, you know, group thing or whatever they call it, came up with the same idea and message each other around the same time about it. But what's so interesting to me about these two flags is how they very successfully, I would say, blend a Nordic cross with a Celtic cross, or Nordic culture with Celtic Scottish culture in this sense, and in two different ways too. Like very two different related approaches to it, but different. And I doubt many people who know me or know this show don't know what the flag of Sutherland looks like, and probably most know what Skye looks like as well. But in your more official sounding words, could you like briefly describe those two for the listeners?
Okay, just for my own sanity, I'm not going to use the blazon.
Okay, good.
But just in a sort of technical, less technical way of describing them. So Skye is a blue field with a Scandinavian cross, which is interlaced with a circle, and there's a galley in the canton as well. Sutherland is a white field where a Scandinavian cross and an off-centre saltire are sort of counterchanged over each other to leave a golden star in the middle. I like both of these flags. Sutherland's designer, after the Sutherland controversy, didn't want to give their name, which is absolutely their right.
Right, yeah.
But Skye was designed by a local Gaelic-speaking 9-year-old from one of the schools that I had gone and given presentations to.
So I don't even think I knew that wrinkle. That's so cool. Yeah. Say more. Go on. So two different designers from two different competitions, but I think when you look at both of them, you sort of see they're taking Nordic crosses but doing something different and something local and different. We talked earlier about how the potential of heraldry to do things that haven't been done for the last 500 years of heraldry. So heraldry's still got that potential in it to do things. And these are two examples in Scotland of exactly that happening. Right.
And in a sense, I have lived in Scandinavia. I've lived in Denmark before, so obviously I'm a big fan of the Danish flag and Scandinavian flags.
Sure, yeah.
And I don't necessarily mind them being the basis for flags in in appropriate bits of Scotland, but the best ones, I think, are ones that don't just use Scandinavian crosses.
Yeah.
That do something new and more importantly, local with them. So it's because in a sense you could sort of turn Scotland or bits of Scotland, certainly the islands and the very, very north, into sort of a new bit of Scandinavia with just fairly plain Scandinavian crosses. But
right.
to put that Scottish spin on it, I think is symbolically incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And I would describe it in this sort of way. And this describes my philosophy about vexillology generally. If you have one symbol, that is a statement of identity, and that is very important, absolutely. But if you have something or if you have two symbols and you're using them either side by side or together in a bigger symbol, that is describing not only identity but relationship, and that is far more complex, far more nuanced, and far more powerful than just an individual expression of identity. Sutherland and Skye are saying something unique about them by the overlap of two identities. In Sutherland's case, Sutherland is called Sutherland because it's the Southland, even though it's in the north in Scotland. It's the southern mainland reach of Viking territory in Scotland, hence
right.
Sutherland. So their flag is, we are saying something unique about the medieval boundary border between the Vikings and the Kingdom of Scotland, and that's unique on the mainland. That flag couldn't really be used for any other county, so it's visually distinct, but it's also symbolically incredibly powerful. And Skye is doing basically the same thing, but with the Celtic circular cross,
right,
combined with that. So it's also saying something very unique as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You said it better than I usually am like, hey, these are really pretty.
But they have the benefit of also being quite pretty.
Right. Yeah, it's both. But like you said, that word relationship is, I think, the one to kind of hang on to, like linger on there, because like you said, it is identity, relationship.
And for me, it's the same thing when you're flying flags as well. I like flying flags together because you get to, one flag, as I say, is that single message. But if you fly more than one flag together, you're starting to piece together a relationship or a message. You can say a lot more with just two flags. It's almost like the squared of the flag. It's so much more expressive.
Right. I feel like this is jogging my memory even on, I'm sure I saw, is it one of the borders? Does Sutherland border Caithness?
It does, yes.
I was going to say, I think I've seen a picture of the, it's not border crossing, it's a county thing, but like the county line where you're like, they've got the respective flags like Sutherland and Caithness. And it's like, I love both of these flags so much. Like, I'd love to even just take a picture at that county line, just get a selfie or something. But to your point, and to kind of maybe put a little bow on this, it's for exactly all the reasons that you just stated that I think, while simple, the Shetland flag is doing a lot as well, because it's not doing it so much in the design elements like we talked about with Sutherland and Skye, but it's doing it in the design and the colors. It's basically, if you took the St. Andrew's Saltire and I don't know, you'd have to angle it a little bit differently, but shifted it. And it's the Scottish colors, it's the Scandinavian cross. Like, it maybe is not as visually exciting as one like Sutherland, but I immediately upon seeing it, I get it. Like, I know, okay, this could be nowhere else.
Yeah, you're 100% correct, because, as you say, like, the design is more straightforward, more simple, but the symbolism in it is exactly that sort of overlap, and it's expressive as a result of that.
Yeah.
But as I say, this ability to put, whether it's in one flag with two sets of symbolism within it, or whether it's because you're flying two flags together, this comes back to that point I made right at the start about trying to build that ecosystem.
Yeah.
That ecosystem of symbolism, that ecosystem of the symbolic usage themselves and the flying flags together. That's always what I've wanted to see and to build towards with all of my work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think that is honestly the perfect place to kind of wrap this one up. So we'll go ahead and get into plugs and start to wind down here. Philip, where can people find you, follow you, find the things that are going on with the Lyon Court, all that stuff?
So the Lyon Court have their own website, but obviously they have their social media as well. If you search for either Lyon Court or Court of the Lord Lyon, you'll find them pretty easily. As for myself, I have my own website, vexillologist.scot, and on social media, you'll be able to find me certainly on Facebook, Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, Instagram, all that sort of good stuff, usually under the handle Vex Tibbetts. I appreciate that Tibbetts is probably as difficult to spell, if not more difficult to spell, than vexillologist, so you're probably easier. It's probably easier for you to go to vexillologist.scot and then get to my social media from there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Your name will be in the episode title too. They can refer back to that, but it's 2 B's, 2 T's is how I kept remembering it, and we were corresponding. Anyway, awesome. Yeah, great. I definitely recommend going and following all those places. Like we didn't really get into the Digimon thing, but like, yeah, Philip has a lot of fun on his Twitter and Instagram, like all that stuff. It's not all, well, as you can tell from this conversation, it's not too serious. So anyway, as far as this show, you can find us and follow us if you go to linktree/flagged4content, all spelled out with the FOR. All of our links are on there, but broadly speaking, anywhere with an @sign, we are at flagged for content, like the number 4 in the middle there. And I think that is pretty much, yeah, I had a way to wrap this up, but I don't know where I put it. Is there like any kind of way you could maybe help us wind this down?
Aye, let's see what we can do. Let's give you a toast. Tap a leave mo kirchen, Hannah Bratigan, Scanil.
Santé.
Oh, Slanjava.
Oh, whiskey. That has been, oh Lord, that has been, thanks for listening everyone. This has been Flag for Content. Those of you who are patrons, Philip and I are going to talk for another 15 or so about a couple of the flags, one that's behind me, one that's behind him, and you can hop on over to Patreon to check that out. And I'm going to go cry. Other than that, we will catch y'all on the fly side. Take care. Whew, all right. Flagged for Content is a Flags for Good podcast. Go to flagsforgood.com for more info.